security and all that sort of thing, but really excited that you were able to join us. And it's probably hard for you to recognize where you are actually at all times. So we're glad that you were able to join us. We're going to talk about this perilous moment in global security that we're in right now. It's very clear that we need to make sure our industrial base is more innovative, resilient, and collaborative going forward. So these are some of the things that we want to talk about with Jim today. We're going to discuss about how we can integrate new technologies, enhance resilience, dependability of supply chains and the like, and partnerships, how those are important and how that can impact global security. Sound good?
That sounds great.
Great.
Okay.
So a quote I read today, just to get into the innovative defense industry and the importance of that, it being enhanced. The quote went like this: "Defense will always be a hardware and software game. Increasingly, it will be hardware enabled, but software defined, and software will absorb a lot of the capability and complexity." Do you agree, disagree? What do you think of that?
I agree with the concept, right? Which is you've got to have hardware and software at the leading edge of technology to maintain your advantage and an effective deterrent. My hypothesis, though, at the largest scale is that the U.S. Department of Defense needs systemic change to be able to deliver on that promise. And by systemic change, I mean that we've got to really run the national defense enterprise a lot more like commercial tech and telecom industry works, which is to create an open architecture, standards-based system where all the players, because we need all of U.S. industry and all of allied industry, frankly, to participate on this. And that's everything from a startup in someone's garage in Palo Alto all the way up to, say, Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Northrop Grumman. All those companies and everybody in between, including some of the partners we have built relationships with that are strategic, Microsoft for distributed cloud computing and a classified cloud where we have the only one in the country, where we can do work across different locations on a cloud-based system that Microsoft and our company put together. You need to have the ability to do those kinds of things with these partners because you need a Microsoft to scale the cloud. You need a Verizon to work on 5G networking levels between satellite, ground, and hybrid base stations, for example. You need NVIDIA, which is another partner of ours, to help build digital twins in a way that we can be much more effective with AI, for example. So we really want to bring all of industry into this sort of new approach, which is a mission-based approach, right? So what I mean by that, Andrew, is every defense platform, say ship, satellite, aircraft, et cetera, it's going to have its technology roadmap or a modernization plan to make that piece of equipment more capable as time goes on. But what we really need to do is turn the whole system on its side and look at the mission lens through why do I need that aircraft? What do I need that satellite for? What's the mission I'm trying to accomplish? Because where the software and the AI and the digital technologies will really advantage us is in getting the missions done by combining data flows, communication links, and AI to make all those platforms much more effective. So that's really where this needs to go.
Okay, that makes sense. The mission seems to have been changing, though, also on the battlefield, I guess. I'm curious what lessons you've learned and we've learned from the rapid deployment of defense systems in Ukraine. And how are these developments informing your future innovations? And I might add, and for those who are watching at home, we have a piece that we published just yesterday, and it's called How Ukraine's Drone Industry Took Flight. And basically, there's a group of a few hundred innovative startups that are right now in Ukraine developing small garage startups that are developing their own systems and sending them out into the battlefield. And they're learning a tremendous amount. This is how they're combating Russian mass production. Just curious what the learnings are for Lockheed, how you're applying this.
So the Ukrainian drone industry, which has organically been created, as necessity is the mother of invention, it is said, they've invented an industry on the fly to defend their country in real time. Some of the lessons from that, and something we've been advocating pretty heavily for and still haven't kind of gotten it through yet, is a parallel acquisition path for our Department of Defense that is much faster than the traditional acquisition path, not to replace the acquisition system, but to be adjacent to it. We're not going to try to I don't think it'd be a valuable use of energy to try to change the large acquisition, DoD acquisition system.
Right.
It's embedded, it's actually successful for building and fielding these big platforms at scale, so maybe everything could be improved a little bit, but let's leave that aside. What we need is a parallel acquisition path for digital services, right? And a digital service would be the network of, and this is fascinating, I find, because I used to be in the telecom network business myself. There are cell phones taped to cell towers in Ukraine, and they're just on listening for aircraft coming by or missiles coming by. And those are all networked into a solution for a commander to say, there are 50 Russian drones coming at you based on the sound waves that were picked up by these cell phones that are taped to these towers. So we should have an acquisition path where if somebody comes up with an idea like that and presents it to the Department of Defense, that we can scale it and have hundreds or thousands of those deployed in Europe, deployed in Middle East, deployed in South China Sea in 6 months. Our acquisition system wouldn't kind of enable that. We need an acquisition system that's faster, is less requirements-based, but more capability-based to get these kind of software-based services, these digital services in place.
Can you talk a little bit about 5G.mil, which is a program that you're championing at Lockheed? And some folks here may know about it, but a brief descriptor what it is and how it matters in this exact context that you're describing.
So I'll describe this in terms of the telecom industry,
Yeah.
right? So you can buy a phone in Washington, D.C., use it in Seoul, Korea, and it's just like nothing ever happened. It's automatic, right? That system works that way because there's a standard set of interfaces, frequencies that are being used, APIs that are common, error correction methodologies and algorithms that are cross-licensed among various industry players. And if you can design your phone, or you can design your core network base station, or you can design your antenna to meet those standards, you can go onto the network, or you can sell into the consumer base, and that device will work on any network.
Yeah.
We need to have that in the national defense enterprise, because whether Lockheed Martin built something in 1985 or Northrop Grumman built something in 2015, we should be able to interface those two platforms, right? We should be able to interface that to something that we're putting together now, Joint Fires Network and Indo-PACOM. So you have to have these interfaces and these frequencies, these standards buys in a set. In the telecom industry and in the commercial side, we call that 3GPP. And it's the platform and the body of experts, engineers and scientists and business people that get together in rooms like this and fight out who has the best technology, decide which ones that we're all going to use, and then we can go back to our workshops and build off of those standards. 5G.mil is the brand I came up with for the Department of Defense. We should have that. Now, the first, inklings and the first movement towards that between government, because government has to convene this,
Right.
but it shouldn't run it. Industry should be there, and that's, again, small startups, tech companies, telecom companies, and defense primes. All ought to be in that room setting those standards with their engineers. And then again, we all run out, and the next item I build and the retrofit I do on my aircraft, my F-16, for example, will fit into the 5G.mil standard set and will connect to a satellite that Boeing made. And that's where we need to go. So 5G.mil, or something like it, is the standards body in open architecture. The acquisition path is the other tangible thing we need that government and industry both have to play on to get this done. So we already have our goal. The goal is a national defense strategy. National security strategy says no matter what domain you're in, air, space, sea, undersea, land, et cetera, no matter what service you're in, Army, Navy, Air Force, no matter what allied partner you are, UK, France, Poland, Japan, you'll be able to work together with all of your systems and all your equipment and all your comm gear, and we can fight together. And that is what we're trying to implement with 5G.mil.
Outstanding. That sounds like bringing a lot of people together to get in the same direction there, of course, as well. But it sounds like a very interesting strategy. Let's talk a little bit about industry resilience and anti-fragility. We've talked a lot in past about supply chain issues. How can we have a dependable supply chains and growth? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how Lockheed Martin is growing stronger in the face of those challenges, what you're trying to do to make sure the industrial base can withstand economic and geopolitical headwinds going forward.
So similar to the technology path that we just talked about, we're trying to use our company as the pathfinder to show how this can be done. So just a quick aside, we have 4 business areas, we call them, or divisions. They were semi-independent, in years past, but to implement the national defense strategy, we actually had to work together better internally first, because we have divisions that build satellites, sonar rigs for undersea, aircraft, of course,
right.
Lower domain aircraft, which are helicopters, and we needed to tie all those products together and deliver better on missions using digital technology. So we're doing that on the technical side. On the resilience side, I have advocated in my company and now externally, there's a book by Nassim Taleb who wrote The Black Swan. He also wrote a book called Anti-Fragility, which is a point you just made. Anti-fragility means you can design a system that when it's disrupted or interrupted does not fail or catastrophically degrade, right? So how do you keep something strong by design and not wait till something adverse happens to be able to respond to that? So when it comes to defense production, there's some pretty straightforward things the government and industry can do together to build resiliency. One is, and these sound simple, but we have to get them through the acquisition system, and Congress has to approve the funding for these things.
Right.
Which is, I don't know if it's 5 or 10% of the entire budget, but for that 5 or 10% investment, you could get much better resiliency, and you could get much better scalability. And the kinds of things that I'm describing here are buying long lead time parts, for example. So if you go back in the supply chain 4 or 5 steps, we need an order 2 years from now for a microchip to put into an aircraft. Well, why don't we buy 2 years worth of that now? And then if there's ever an interruption like COVID in the supply chain, or one of our sources goes out of business, or the Chinese quit exporting something that we need, that we've at least got a year or 2 of stocks to keep the production line running. That's one relatively easy one. The second one is multi-year procurements. So for large aircraft like F-35 or Black Hawk, there have been 2 or 3 year multi-year procurements. But what the technology industry does is they run on a subscription business model, Andrew, which means, so for example, using the example of cell towers, which you have a cell tower, there's 2 or 3, if you drive by these things, they have 2 or 3 platforms of equipment on it. Each of those is a wireless carrier, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, something, that is transmitting off that site. Well, to build a new site, I need a 10-year lease from you, and then I'll go finance it on Wall Street and I'll go build a site. That's a 10-year subscription. You sign up for a subscription for your cell phone for a year. That's the receiving end of this network. And yeah, unless you sign up for a 1 or 2 year subscription, you're going to pay a higher price, for example. So the way the tech industry does things is they essentially lock you into a long-term agreement. You're going to pay every month or every year, and that's how they continue to upgrade the software and the hardware as you go.
Right.
The Department of Defense tends to buy things with, it's like buying a used car in a car lot. You drive the car away, you sign a title, we call it a DD-250, and now you own that thing. And now you've got to, if you want a better engine in that, you're going to have to go pay for it later, right? So instead of the subscription model where the OEM or the network operator is continuously upgrading their entire system for the mission they're doing, which is providing you mobile internet, you're back and forth with industry, it's clunky, and you don't have continuous improvement, frankly. And that's one of the other things that we need to do.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm in the subscription business, by the way, so I need to go for those longer-term deals. I like your thinking.
That's right. You know what I'm talking about.
So let's talk about, we promised we talk about global partnerships also. So critical to this, and actually it leads back to supply chains. How can, and how does Lockheed Martin deepen its collaboration with international allies and partners, expanding supply chain accessibility and enhancing delivery of key systems? I mean, we are here, after all, at the NATO summit this week, and this is a key element of, I'm sure, some of the discussions that you'll be having this week later.
Yeah, this is really critical to both things. First of all, the technology insertion. There's really good technology in places like Europe and Japan, Taiwan as well. We ought to be able to leverage those. And also on the physical side, there are trained labor forces, there are factory capacity available in various countries of our allies, for example. And so to add to the anti-fragility, you can distribute your production and sustainment operation around the world. So if you have a pandemic in one country and it doesn't affect another country, you're still producing, for example, right? So this internationalization will help. Now, most of the big aerospace companies are doing this at some level. But what we've done, again, is we kind of turned the whole company on its side and said, look, normally we have offset requirements, right? So we sell, 40 F-35s to a country. They want $1 billion worth of industrial participation. And offset is like a pain to figure out, and it's just something you have to do. And I said, no, you know what we should do? We should have a Lockheed Martin, and maybe every other company will do something like this, a deliberate plan for global production operations and sustainment in the places where our customers are and where our U.S. forces are deployed. And that is Asia and that is Europe.
Right.
And that's something we're deliberately doing. A couple partnerships I can mention, because I know we're short on time, is with Rheinmetall in Germany. We are building a HIMARS in Germany, calling it GMARS with them. That's one example. And also in Poland with one of the government-controlled industries there, we're building Javelin missiles. So we have our own JV with Raytheon to build Javelin missiles. We're also incorporating now this Polish company to build them in Poland.
And I would imagine that'll make service easier also on some of these systems as well. You're a lot closer to your market.
That's exactly right. I mean, you need to get things fixed, as you say. You don't have to ship them all the way across to the United States and back. And if you're in a contested logistics environment, which is what the national security strategy says we're going to be in, you don't want to have to do that. You want to have sustainment or repair operations right where you're using the equipment. And we actually have a small HIMARS repair station on the Polish border of Ukraine. And when the Ukrainian HIMARS get damaged, battle damage, which they have, and I've seen when I visited there, you can actually just drive them across the border, put them on a train car, and get them fixed and drive them back.
That makes a lot of sense, faster into market and then the battlefront where they're needed.
Right.
I know we could go on forever, but I think we really touched on all the key points here. We wanted to talk about integrating digital technologies. We talked about 5G.mil, enhancing industry resilience and anti-fragility, and about global partnerships as well. And it's great to hear that you're having some of those on-the-ground operations that will help support those partners. Jim Taiclet, CEO of Lockheed Martin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to, Andrew. Thanks, everybody.